Hi and welcome to Painting with Yuk-Sem. Today we're going to be painting an island with a really nice water in the front with a little bit of sun peeking through the trees. Let's get started. So I'm going to start with acrylic paint. I use a bit of water to thin the paint, and I'm going to go right in with a wet brush. I'm going to pick up some of that white, and I'm going to add a fairly thick layer right here because I'm going to be building from the white out to the blue. So I want to start with a really nice coat of white so that I don't lose it, and I'll be able to pick that up. So then I'm going to come around and add some of that light blue, and you'll see that it's all around it. But what I want to do is to be able to get a little bit of white through there too, so that now as I'm going to do my crisscross brush strokes, it's going to start blending it in. So it's going to pick up that white and leave some of that blue there and really blend it in. So I'm going crisscross back and forth, and that gives me that really nice brush stroke and shape in the sky, especially when I want to build in some of those clouds. So if you do too much of the same stroke, it's really going to be uniform. So every once in a while you want to make sure that you bring it down, you change it up, and you watch that you're not getting like too much of a pattern going on. Just go over. Now that I have some dark spots and some light spots, now I can come in and start adding to that. So from the sun area here, I want to start building it out. So I'm going to add some white over here for some of those clouds. And I'm going to pick up some of that blue. And what I want is that ray effect going out. So I'm going to alternate having some of the dark blue and some of the light blue all the way around. So it'll give the effect of having that alternating without it actually having the pattern necessarily laid out where people can say, oh, I can see that there's the rays there. It'll just give that impression of it by having some of, there's that white, the white, blue, and alternating the pattern that way, but without having it too distinctive. So now that I have my colors laid out, I can come back in, and just by gently going back and forth on it, it's just blending it in, going back and forth, making sure that I'm not losing too much of that color that I wanted, but at the same time I'm making sure that there's some coverage and that there's not too many of those big dark lines. Now up here, I'm just going to start going into a bit of a darker, and there's that white that's coming through all the way into the corner. Once again, making sure that I'm blending it. If I lose a bit of that white, just come back in, add some white onto it, and blend it back out. The nice thing about acrylics is that you get that nice coverage, and it's your painting. You get to decide pretty much however you want it to be. So I'm just coming in, having a bit of fun with those brush strokes and mixing those colors up. Now I'm going to grab a little bit of the dark blue. I haven't washed my brush. I'm just grabbing some of that in order to come in and darken the edges a little bit, maybe where there's a bit more of depth to the sky. And by keeping on with those brush strokes, what it'll do is it'll pick up a little bit of that wet paint. If you wait too long between the layers, you'll lose some of that wet paint, and then you won't be able to blend it in quite as easily. So if that does happen, then just grab some white and some blue, some of the light blue, and you can come in and do it again. Let's say here, just grab some of that white again, and a bit of the lighter blue, and then you'll just be able to blend it in over those brush strokes where you saw it. So by adding a little bit of that dark blue to our painting, it'll give it a little bit more depth to say that, oh, maybe there's a bit more of a cloud, and then back there you can see a little bit more where we want the light to kind of disappear into the distance. I'm going to come in on this side. See where the paint is actually, it's not blending because the underneath is a bit dry. So I'm going to come back in with that blue on top there, a little bit of the white to blend it, and just like that it disappears. So then I can come in with that darker blue that I want down here and keep on blending. I'm going to come in on this side, and let's start working on that color where I want the water to be. So see where I have the dark blue, now I'm going to mix it with the light blue here so that I can get a little bit of the depth of the color without, I'm just going to come in and add a little bit of that blue so that I get some of that blending. And then because this is where the white was, I can just add some of that white to it, and there you go. It just starts blending all in. Right like that. So now we're starting to get a little bit of depth to our sky. So I'm going to come in with some Payne's Gray and then the darker blue, and I'm going to start adding that water line down here. So I'm going to start with the darker, right where we want that island to be. And then I'm going to work my way from there to the darker blue on the sides. And now, because it's going to be reflecting some of this, I want that to have the lighter blue. So when you're doing water, remember that your lines have to be horizontal in order to get that effect. If you make them too choppy, it'll look like it's a really blustery day and the waves are coming in. If you want that calm look, make sure that your brush strokes are nice and even right across. And now, as the island's going to be around here, what I want is for it to be reflecting the sky a little bit more. So over here, that's where I'm going to start picking up some of this blue. And my brush still has some of the dark blue in there, and that's okay. And then I can pick up some of the white and bring that in as well, and just get some nice coverage. I'm not too worried about reproducing exactly because it's a little bit more of an abstract. So remember, if you're having trouble painting the bottom with the canvas, grab it, turn it over, and now all of a sudden you have all that freedom to paint because you're not limited by your easel, and nobody will know that you flipped your canvas over to paint. So I'm just going to come in and make sure that I have some coverage on there, that I have paint everywhere, and that my brush strokes again are always horizontal. They're always running right with the canvas, covering up all those spots, but always going back and forth in the same direction so that you're not having all those choppy lines. All right, I'm just going to grab a bit of water, because where you still see your canvas, if you add a bit of water to that paint, it'll actually help the paint go between all those threads in the canvas, and it'll come in and help get that coverage that you were looking for, instead of adding big gobs of the paint. All right, so now we have the sky with a few of those cloud areas and the lake. So I'm going to wash that brush off, and let's get started on some of the clouds. So I'm going to switch now to my round brush, so it's rounded. It'll be a lot easier to get just those edges of the clouds on there. So I'm going to get it wet, and then I'm going to go right into the titanium white. So I'm going to pick where I want that sun to be, and then I'm going to start doing some outlines of the clouds. So the way that I'm going to start making these nice billowy clouds, I just put the bottom in first, and then I'm just going to start with the roundness and putting in either some half circles, some full circles, and I'm not worried about whether or not the paint's all uniform, because that'll just give some depth to it, right? It'll just naturally give you some of those lights and shadows that happen in clouds as they form up in the sky. So sometimes it might be a lot lighter, and sometimes it'll be a little bit darker. And the more you play with it, the more realistic they're going to be. All right. So now I'm going to add, maybe, let's try make one right up about here. I'm going to add in one of those clouds right where I want that light to come in. Add in a few clouds there. So the other area that I have is going to be this one here, where I had this ray of light. So in order to highlight that, let's start making some of those clouds over on this side, in that same pattern where I wanted all that light to be. And now down here, this is where I want that area for that last little cloud. Once again, trying to keep the bottoms a little bit flatter for these clouds, and then building up the tops with some of those bubbles that are happening. There we go. Now, let's say the sun's right about here. Let's add a few down here. That's just going to be peeking through the trees. Something like that. So now that I have the basic shape of what I want my clouds to be, now I can start adding all those shadows to them. So I'm going to go in with a bit of the Payne's gray, the white, and a bit of the blue. And then wherever I have my clouds, what I want is that the front of the cloud now is going to be a lot more in the shadow, because I want the sun to be far behind. So these clouds are actually closer than the sun. So wherever I have that cloud, now I'm just going to paint the inside of it with that darker color. So this is where you can get a little bit more creative and really start to make that cloud shape whatever you want it to be. Because you just want that inside where the light is now to be dark. So I'm going to go in and mix a little bit more of that and come in here In the same way, I'm just coloring or adding color to the inside. So that means that I'm laying that little layer of white actually be still very much in that cloud on the outside. A little bit rounder, a little bit bigger, because you can always come in after and add a little bit more light to it should you want. Now for the clouds that are higher in the sky, I'm just going to make that that shadow a little bit smaller because I want them to look like they're a little bit further away. So I'm going to leave a little bit more white in it. So it's just a little bit of a shadow that's happening there instead. Something like that. And now right in the middle, instead of adding too much white to it, I'm going to use more of that Payne's gray, so that right in the middle, now I'm just going to come in and darken some of the areas that really have no light hitting them at all. Just to fill in so that you don't have such a stamp of clouds. Sometimes there's a little bit more of that misty look happening where you have a little bit more shadow. So that's just a white with a little bit of that color coming in, maybe in front, on the sides. To fill in and just add a bit more depth into it. Something like that. All right, now we're going to work on the sun. So I'm going to grab my small flat brush. I'm going to go right into my cadmium, my deep yellow, with a bit of that white. And right where I want the sun, I'm going to decide where I want it to be. And then from there, I'll be able to design my trees. So that's where my sun is. Therefore, on the underside, where's that sun hitting now? And because it's going to be coming through those trees a little bit, just add a bit of color down there too. Now that we know where our sun is, we're going to go into our fan with our fan brush. So the fan brush, once again, is just a brush, a normal brush. What they do is they pinch it and flatten it out, and then they squeeze it there, and it gives you that nice outline. So all I do is come in with now that black, because we're going to be creating the silhouette of those trees. I load quite a bit of it up on to my fan brush, and then now we can start. So all you do is you turn your brush vertical and you can start marking out some of those trees where you want them, where you want the taller ones at least. When you're making trees with your fan brush, you make sure that you have a lot of paint on it. Start using the corner, and then as you go down, you can just start using more and more of the brush. Tip it up, tip it down. Just keep on going down and dabbing as you go. Sometimes it'll create a branch. Just move it down. The only way to get used to working with a fan brush is to really practice with it. The more trees you do with it, the easier it'll get. Because then you'll notice, oh, I have to move down a little bit more. I have to move over. Right? And that's when your trees will start looking a little bit more like they have that fullness to them. So let's make that tree right up tall there. And again, just starting from the corner, just take it and start dabbing as I move down. Let's say there's a spot right there. I'll leave some open area. So the thing you want is to have a nice thin paint. Make sure you have quite a bit of water, not enough for it to drip, but enough for it to really be able to get some nice movement in when you want to do a tree. with the rest there. And just like that, making those nice straight rays. You have the sun peeking out from behind your island. Maybe a few sun spots that are coming through, making that sun nice and white. And just like that, I hope you enjoy. Have fun with it. We'll see you next time on Painting with Yuk-Sem.